What's going on YouTube? Haven't made any content in the last, well, a few weeks actually. So I wanted to touch base with you guys and show you something that I've done with the Mach 1. And I don't know if you guys can really tell. You absolutely cannot tell. But I put a 2003 and 4 Cobra fuel tank in this car. These are baffled, so they're a little more performance oriented versus the regular fuel tanks in the GT cars and the Mach 1s and even the V6s. They're all the same except for the Cobra tanks, and the difference is just in the baffles. Along with that, I put in a Wabro 255 fuel pump assembly from, well, not from, but for a 1998 Mustang, because those cars were a return style fuel system, and the actual 2004 Mach 1 this car, originally was, they were returnless style. So the previous top hat on my last fuel pump assembly, someone had drilled a hole through it and put in a AN fitting and made a return port that way. Eventually the gaskets started leaking, and every time I'd fill this car up full tank, it would actually start leaking out from the top of the tank. That's extremely dangerous. So I just went ahead, bought a brand new fuel tank and a actual fuel pump assembly that has the return and feed lines both integrated into the top hat. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. And today what I'm doing is replacing the AC compressor, because this one is actually leaking where the compressor, like the two halves, are kind of connected together. So with temperatures up from 95 to 100 degrees, AC is a necessity right now. And plus the windows are untouched on this car, they're not tinted. So this is your typical fishbowl setup right here. This AC compressor put on. So this will be a AC compressor install on a Coyote swapped New Edge Mustang. So one thing I am going to do up top before I jack the car up is actually just remove this top intake coupler, and that clamp is just an 8mm bolt. So I'm just going to shift this thing over to the side and leave everything connected to it. That way I can free up some extra room. Actually, I'm just going to go ahead and disconnect this map sensor. That way there's not so much strain on it. But this way I have more access to the top of the AC compressor, because we are going to need to get to the main bolt that holds in the compressor fitting, or the hardline fitting. It's one big block that we're going to have to loosen up and remove from the AC compressor. So now I'm going to jack the car up and I'll show you guys what we are looking at underneath the car. So the car is jacked up and supported. So you can see a big mess that my compressor is making. We have all this green. I guess they had some type of dye put in it, and this is to help find and spot the leak. And sure enough, this thing is leaking pretty bad. So what we're going to do is just now we're going to take some tension off this belt, this tensioner up here. Don't have to take it off, we just need to loosen it up, get it off the AC compressor pulley, and then while we're down here, we can go ahead and disconnect the compressor's fittings right here. Not sure how this one disconnects, but we will need to disconnect that without breaking it. There's a tab up top, so I'm just gonna raise this up and I'll show you guys. You just lift that tab up, so that's disconnected, and it looks like we have 3 bolts on this side here that we need to disconnect. And here's this block I was telling you guys about. It has the 2 hard lines going into it. It's held together by 1 bolt, so we'll have to disconnect that. So step 1, remove your electrical connectors. We'll take tension off this AC compressor and remove the belt from the pulley. And once all that's done, we should probably go ahead and remove the block holding the 2 hard lines on, and then we will remove the 3 bolts, and the compressor should just drop right on out of there. So with the Coyote swap, it is not one size fits all. Most people are running the power by the hour alternator relocation bracket and use a Coyote's alternator, which is flipped backwards. I'm reusing the Mach 1's accessories, so the alternator is up here tucked underneath the Boss 302 intake manifold. So now I release tension on the tensioner. I just pulled this belt. It rides along this idler pulley here. It's the easiest belt to, or it's the easiest spot to grab the belt because it has the least resistance, and you can just flip the belt right off. So now with the belt slid off, we have slack down here at the compressor, so that just comes right off. So now we have no tension on the AC compressor. Like I said, this is not a one-size-fits-all ordeal, but on most Coyote swap vehicles and even the regular 4 valves, this is where the AC compressor is located stock. So everything else should be relatively the same throughout, but that is a disclaimer. Do not expect your Coyote swap to be the same as mine. So with the intake out of the way, you guys can get a better look at that one little bolt that holds the high and low side hard lines on. Like I said, it's like a big shared block. 1 bolt holds it on. So we're going to go ahead and loosen up that bolt. You're supposed to evacuate a air conditioning system if it has refrigerant inside of it. Mine's pretty much all very well leaked out, so we're not releasing anything into the atmosphere. So here is my setup here. I have a bunch of 3/8 drive extensions, a 3/8 drive universal joint or a swivel, and a 10mm socket, which is the size of that bolt. And I'm just going to manually turn it with a 3/8 drive ratchet. So like I said, my system has all the refrigerant has leaked out. So if you guys are doing this with the system under pressure, be extremely careful, because if there is any refrigerant still left in your system, it is going to be pressurized, and that can be dangerous. I'll just remove the ratchet. I'm going to turn this setup by hand now. And I dropped a washer. I don't know if the bolt dropped with it or not. So yeah, the bolt and washer has dropped. And what I'm going to do now is pull this block up. Hopefully I can get it in the viewfinder for you guys, and there we go. So the block just raises off, and you're going to have 2 O-rings that sit inside your compressor. The green O-rings there, and mine look brand new because I did just replace all the O-rings in my AC system. So make sure your new compressor has brand new O-rings, and if not, make sure you put new ones on. So I made sure I found that bolt and washer, because we will need to reuse that. I don't know if the compressor comes with a new one or not, but here's that green dye I was telling you guys about. I feel like my entire air conditioning system is full of this instead of refrigerant. So as you guys can see, it's made a huge mess. It has dripped on everything. Luckily it cleans off pretty easy. It's just you know, it looks radioactive or something, but yeah, this block right here, no O-rings on this block, they just remain on the compressor. So make sure when you remove this block that the O-rings haven't stuck to this block, because you do not want to go back with new O-rings and then double stack with the old ones, because you'll have a leak. So just going to try to clean up some of this residual dye that is everywhere. Here it is on the boot of the rack and pinion here. But let's go ahead and get this compressor off now. So the 3 bolts holding the compressor on are 13 millimeters. So I'm gonna go ahead and break these by hand. So with those broke free by hand, I'm just going to use my electric ratchet and quickly remove those bolts, just like so. And we'll leave the top one in place, because once we loosen that one up completely, the compressor is obviously going to fall out. Hopefully I have my phone positioned in a spot that you guys can see what I'm doing, but I'm going to hold on to the compressor. Actually, the compressor is still in place. I just needed a little wiggle, and there we are. Cover this up from, we don't want contaminants getting up in there, so we'll go ahead, I'll probably just tape that off and wait for the new AC compressor to show up. So one thing I wanted to share with you guys is, whenever you remove your old compressor, just go ahead and put it side by side with your new compressor to make sure it is in fact the same thing. As you guys can see, I had removed this compressor in hopes of putting this one on, but that is not going to happen today, as I'm going to have to ship this one back to Amazon and have them ship me the correct one. Okay, fast forward 5 days later. I'm gonna love when 2-day shipping somehow turns into a week. But here's the new compressor. Now let's pull this one out and compare it and see if this one actually matches. Let's see, what do we have in here? Some kind of like sleeves. So far this actually looks like an exact match. I'm thinking the clutch has been replaced on this compressor before, because the connector is actually kind of offset, but all the listings show this exact compressor for the Mach 1s. And my last compressor that I bought, you know, it was a Mach 1 compressor listing. I just somehow got sent the wrong compressor. I have no clue how that happened, but here we are. Looks like we have the right one, so I'm just going to unbox this. I want to make sure, see if there's like some kind of instruction manual or anything that tells us if this compressor's been pre-filled or not, just to make sure. But we do need to make sure it's pre-filled before we add any PAG oil or PAG oil to the compressor, because we don't want to put it in dry and we don't want to overfill it. But they did send us new O-rings. Remember, these need to be replaced, so we have new ones. That's good. Let's go ahead and get this thing unbagged and throw it back on. Okay, so putting the compressor on, we're just going to go completely backwards of how we removed it. I want to try to get the top bolt fed through the top of the compressor and see if I can't feed it into the top. If that doesn't work, just start any bolt that's easier for you to access. Once you get one started, it'll make things a lot more easier to manage. So it's just trying to keep the compressor upright so you don't leak any of the oil inside of it. And just kind of finagle this thing up here. These aren't exactly light, so it is a little frustrating trying to get them started. So if you can get it started by hand just a little bit and take your ratchet, my electric ratchet comes in handy. So we got one started. Now we'll just grab another one. And looks like I'm actually gonna have to shift the compressor a little bit. Get these holes at the bottom lined up. Again, just try to get them started by hand. That way you don't risk cross threading or stripping out the threads. I do it by hand. You get a better feel for it. Okay, those are started by hand. Let's get these in. I'm gonna torque them by hand manually. And now we can get our electrical connector snapped into place just like so. We're gonna go up top and put in our new bolt. So you can see the compressor O-rings there. I'm reusing the brand new bolt they gave us, but I'm using the washer that I took off mine. It just adds more pressure on the block, and I have the block covered up with a rag just so nothing would get inside the high or low side lines. So I'm gonna remove this, toss it to the side, and we're gonna try to work this block back on top of the compressor. So you can actually just line the block up and you can push it in and it will kind of sit in place. The O-rings kind of hold it in, and then you can set the bolt in place, hand tighten it of course, and that is a 10 millimeter. Even the new bolt is still a 10 millimeter. So we're going to tighten that up. I ran that bolt in manually by hand. You don't have to over torque it. That is aluminum and you don't want to strip that bolt or even the threads in the compressor. You would have a very bad day. If you feel like maybe it isn't seated right or you don't have it torqued, don't worry about it until you put a vacuum on it. And if it doesn't hold a vacuum, then you can go back, double check this, loosen it up, check the O-rings, go back over it. But we'll worry about that process once we get to it. Now we're still working on getting it completely buttoned up, and now just all that entails is getting the belt put back on. So the belt's routed back in place, and to loosen the tension, it's just a 3/8 drive. You stick inside the tensioner and you just tighten it. Well, this isn't really a breaker bar, it's just a giant ratchet, but I have it set on tighten, and that's what allows me to have the leverage to turn it over to the right and loosen the tensioner. So we have the belt on, electrical connectors on, the high and low side lines are on. Now we are just going to put this cold air intake back in place. Remember, I disconnected the mass airflow sensor harness because it had some tension on it. So we're going to hook that back up. This coupler was just an 8 millimeter, so we'll go ahead and get that zapped on. So to run a vacuum, we need to go ahead and hook up a set of gauges. Your blue is your low side, red is your high side. This is the low side port on a new Edge car. High side port These are like a squeeze collar style gauge. You have to pull the collar up on these to get them to situate. And once you have it in, you just tighten this. We're going to use this yellow line for our vacuum pump. So we go ahead and disconnect it from up top. We'll have this hang out to the side. And then we really don't need the high side line. So we have it hooked up to the vacuum pump here. Point a vacuum on it. So we're looking at around 28. Let it run for about an hour. And you just need the low side hooked up. Pull a vacuum, we don't have to worry about the high side. But yeah, we'll let that run, and once we disconnect it, we're going to see if it's going to hold that vacuum. And if it does, that means everything's sealed up nice. If it starts bleeding off, then maybe one of the O-rings got pinched, or maybe that bolt that holds the hard block on isn't tightened all the way up. So it's been about an hour. We're still pulling vacuum on this, and I just wanted to share with you guys that the Mach 1's AC system takes 8 to 10 ounces of PAG 46 oil, and it takes 24 ounces or two 12-ounce cans of R134A refrigerant. So the AC compressors that you buy remanned usually have about 6 ounces of PAG oil in them, so you may have to add about 2 ounces to your refrigerant. Other than that, that's all the capacities that you need to know for the Mach 1. So if you disconnect your vacuum and it holds steady like that, you have no leaks, and you can go ahead and add 1 can or your 12 ounces worth of refrigerant to your system with the car off, and then add in your second one when you just start the car. Put the first can in, then turn your AC on max, then you go ahead and add your second can. So if your gauge set has a shot glass like this, and if you see no bubbles, you're doing pretty good. If your gauge is holding steady, great. So I've stuck a thermometer in my bottom vent just to get an idea of how well this compressor is working. It is getting it down to 48 degrees, it looks like, which is doing pretty good because it's 90 degrees outside right now. It really does feel awesome inside this car. And that's pretty much the gist of it. Have good working AC now. And if you guys really want to do things right, you can always replace the orifice tube. These cars don't really have a dryer. They use a orifice tube setup. Other cars use an expansion valve and dryer, and usually people replace the dryer, but in these setups you can replace the orifice tube. But in this case I didn't, but it posed no problem adding the refrigerant. Usually those tubes can get clogged up and overpressurize the system, and I know in this video I didn't run the high pressure side. I just decided to run the low. The AC's healthy, it's running good, so there's really no need to do that. But yeah, that's pretty much a AC compressor install on a Coyote new edge swap car in a nutshell. So as always, thanks for watching.